bringing up it now to be integral to effectively people, and that's going to be the word culture. At least within the confines of a single family office, what does culture mean to you?
Culture's the DNA. It's the operating system of the entity. And it's interesting because I think it's so important, and yet even if you don't define it, a culture exists. So people are kind of funny about that. They think you have to define it. It's like, no, a family has a culture. Even if they don't define it, it just happens. It's the way everybody interacts. But you actually can shape that by being more proactive and defining and also being aspirational. What do we want to be? And again, that goes back to where I think good leaders shine, is they look for aspirational objectives and not just where we are, but how can we get to a place that's more excellent? And I think a lot of that culture is really the glue. I mean, the number one reason someone stays is because of how they feel about their manager. Stays or goes. So that's pretty important. So you should spend quite a bit of time thinking about that, and how does it work, and how does that relationship, how does the communication happen? Those are very important things to pay attention to.
So the culture in the single family office could very well be different than the culture within the family, although I'm assuming
Yes.
there's some level of alignment of interest. Is the culture exclusively driven by the family's input and the leader in the SFO?
No, it's all of the people in it create the culture. I believe in the best cultures, it is set at the top, and there will be a difference in the family and the office, but the direction should be the same. In an ideal world, it's not always, but in an ideal world, you are clear about, these are my values, and these are the things that matter to me. So when you're making decisions, these are the things that you should be thinking about to guide your decision making. And it's really, when Google started, their mantra was do no evil. And so that was their guiding principle in making decisions, was to make sure they weren't doing evil. And it sounds really simple, but it's like a tagline, and it helps you make your decisions. And I know someone else whose decision is always around, is this a wise choice? Applying wisdom, like, is this wise? And that can kind of help you step back and say, how do I guide the process? So again, I think you can be proactive about a culture, but even if you're not, people will create the culture.
There's been many people that have disagreed with me on this, and it's not a fact.
Well, that's why you're who you are, Angelo.
Well, culture is something that I think is incredibly important. Bringing up the great Peter Drucker again, among his most famous comments was, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Maybe it was lunch, but we get the idea. I am not as big of a believer in, we have a culture here in the family office, and you, prospective employee, have to fit into it. At least they have a culture, and it looks like it's working. I'm not saying that's bad, but would it be better, maybe more risky, but better I want you to be additive to our culture, to make it better than it is now.
It's funny you say that, because right as you were speaking, I thought of the word additive. Because I agree, I don't think someone should be forced to fit into what exists. I think they should be adding to it in the best world, that you can look at them and say, I see them meshing with what's already here and bringing something that we don't have.
Staying on the topic of culture, and probably going to get politically incorrect. This is where I also get in some trouble.
You got to be disruptive. That's okay.
Using that as an example, it's probably not good for a family office to have. We have 7 employees. They're all over 50-year-old males who graduated from one of 2 Ivy League schools. Don't they, in general, I believe family offices need more women. They need more minorities in terms of diversity and additive to the culture, not because of any legal perspective or looking good from the outside. I could care less about that. Strictly from the perspective of, it's good to make our family office better.
Yeah, that's the whole premise of diversity, is that you get a broader, more inclusive outcome and a more encompassing outcome. And I know some people have resisted that, and they like people that look the same and it feels safe. But a lot of data shows that diversity is the way to go. And you think about it, if you have a bunch of over 50 white males, what are you going to do when they all get to retirement age? I mean, you want a mix for a lot of different reasons. And one of the biggest ones is the culture and is the perspective. It's why I think people should travel and see other places and see other ways of living. It's an important piece of development.
There's a belief that many people in their 20s begin to form effectively who they are in the business world or in the executive world. And at that stage, they're a sponge, they're learning, and let's assume they rise through the ranks and they start to have some success. I think that often, somewhere in that process, probably often in their 30s, because what they were doing is working, they stop training, looking to be better. They're not as open-minded. That's another trait that I forgot to mention earlier, and a big one with Ray Dalio. We'll get to Mr. Dalio and his principles a little bit later. How do you encourage even someone who's top 1%, a talented executive, that you don't know everything? Would it be good if you remain open-minded and learning, and even the travel and meeting other family office executives and other companies that are much bigger than yours, that maybe there's something you could still learn from?
Right. Well, I find that very interesting, Angelo, and I agree with you. I think as people get older, it's hard to maintain open-mindedness, and I'll put myself in that category. It's something you have to work harder at doing. But as far as family office is concerned, my belief is that you would, in order to create that kind of culture of being open, the first step would be for the family to say they value that very clearly. We value being open, so that everyone knows that's a value. The second step would be to put some kind of metric in place. Maybe it's part of the bonus or it's part of the review process that it's talked about. You know, we're going to consider the fact that part of your review is how you accepted change or came up with new ideas, or were open to going to a conference or something that shows willingness to stay fluid. So I think that there are several things you can do, but I would start with the easiest, which is just be articulate that it's an important value.